Let's go ahead and start with introductions. So thank you everyone for being here. This session is Wellbeing for LA Online Learning Center, using human-centered design and next-gen digital capabilities to support the Los Angeles County workforce. And our presenters today are Rachel Linus, Director of Digital Solutions, Lauren Marlott, Director of Learning and Development, and Greg Barish, co-founder and CEO of Alliance Logic. Please take it away.
All right. So hi, everyone. We're really excited to present here on our work on behalf of UCLA. So today we're going to be discussing a digital platform that we started back in 2019 in partnership with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. And it's called the Wellbeing for LA Online Learning Center. And like the title suggests, it's developed to help support the well-being of the Los Angeles County workforce. And to date, we have over 35,000 users on the platform, and we've seen some impressive and promising outcomes. So this presentation really serves to unpack some of our success, highlighting our approach to public health, behavioral health, and digital. So it's a very interdisciplinary type of presentation, and there's a lot to get through. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let me just advance these slides. Okay, so these are the learning objectives as we submitted in our proposal, but in general, our presentation is split into 3 parts. So I'll first describe our overview of the division and just setting the stage from both a behavioral health and digital perspective. And then I'll hand it off to Lauren, who will deep dive more into the digital platform, the Wellbeing for LA Learning Center, and also describe the development of digital content. And then we'll pass it over to Greg, who can talk more about some of our next generation digital capabilities, including how we leverage artificial intelligence and AI, which I'm sure is why a lot of you are here. So with that said, I thought it'd be helpful to sort of describe our division, and it helps set the stage for why we develop the tools that we do. So the UCLA Division of Population Behavioral Health, what does that mean? That basically means that we take a public health approach to behavioral health care, mental health care. I'll use those terms interchangeably. And it means that we're committed to improving the mental and physical well-being of individuals and families. And we recognize that individuals don't exist in vacuums. We exist in systems, including family systems, community systems, school systems, healthcare systems, et cetera. And our health is influenced by these systems. So we try to use a comprehensive approach that not only includes behavioral health services, but also research and education, academic research and education. And we try to integrate as much as possible into these various settings. So not just healthcare, but also outside of healthcare, into the home, into the school, into the communities, and so on. And the reason for this comes from something called the Population Health Framework. And this is a framework developed by the Institute of Medicine. And this basically tells us that the more we shift mental health care delivery, and not just mental health care delivery, but healthcare in general, the more that we shift to promotion and prevention, multiple positive outcomes can happen. So when I say promotion, I'm really referring to awareness around particular services. When we talk about prevention, we talk about, we're referring to targeted resilience skills used to manage daily stressors, or maybe when mental health symptoms first start. And when this is done right, we see that costs are reduced, stigma is reduced, access to care is improved, outcomes are improved. But the issue is that most of our healthcare delivery in general still exists within these yellow and orange areas, meaning there's lots of missed opportunities for both promotion and prevention when it comes to mental health. So as a result, we have found ourselves in something called a crisis of care. And this phrase was coined by Dr. Thomas Insel. He's the former head of the National Institute of Mental Health. And he calls this a crisis of care specifically because we miss so many Americans in those promotion and prevention areas of the population health framework. And as a result, this has resulted in worst outcomes, increased costs over the last decade or so. So COVID has definitely taken a toll on our mental health, but the truth is our mental health outcomes were worsening over the last decade or so. So the truth is most people with a mental health disorder don't actually get treatment. I think the latest stat I saw was 55% of adults and 60% of youth. And of those that get treatment, it's usually not of high quality. And we're also losing clinicians. Either they're exiting insurance or they're leaving the profession altogether. A lot of times it's due to burnout. And this is where our division has spent a lot of time just trying to improve the well-being of clinicians. And so, the sad reality is the mental health care delivery system is worsening faster than it's improving. And yes, COVID has made it worse, but it's really forcing the mental health industry to figure out new and creative ways to address these critical access and quality gaps. And there's a lot of different approaches that are being introduced. There's integrated care models. We're also seeing a resurgence in psychedelics, but another area that's of special interest is something called digital behavioral health or digital mental health. And that's really why we're here to talk about that. So to really unpack what this means in the context of behavioral health, let's first define what digital is. And I like definitions. I especially like this definition from the NHS. And digital is defined as the application of culture, processes, business models, and technologies of the internet era in response to people's raised expectations. So this definition really highlights that digital is not technology, it's more about the application of technology. And with that, digital gives us three new value propositions. We have ubiquitous data, unlimited connectivity, and massive processing power. So if we take this and then we apply it to behavioral health, there's some early research that suggests that digital has the potential to address these critical access and quality challenges in behavioral healthcare. And the way that this can be done is really in two ways. There's two value propositions when it comes to digital behavioral health. And the first one is new ways to quantify lived experiences of end users, or new ways to deliver personalized interventions to end users. And when I bring up end users, I'm really talking about two main buckets, and we'll allude to this throughout the presentation. The first group is those receiving the intervention. So in our case, it'll be the learners, but also those enabling the intervention. So in this case, it's our internal teams. And with that, as we move digital, or as we increase digital maturity, we'll see that digital technologies move outside of the health system, hospital settings, more into the asynchronous community settings, which reflects really our mission. And that's where we want to promote prevention and all those different services that are outside of health system walls, again, to prevent mental health issues from getting worse in the first place. So I did use a keyword in the previous slide. I used the word potential. The truth is digital implementations are still very hard to do. In the context of mental health, digital is still very much underutilized. So we won't talk all day about what digital maturity means. I think that's for another presentation. But in general, when I came across a paper, and I think these are really the key habits that we adopted. And according to the research, this is what digitally mature companies adopt in order to implement digital tools. But the key habits for digital success are co-design with end users, assemble cross-functional teams or interdisciplinary teams, and then rapidly experiment. And these habits together can help enable organizations or teams to adopt a human-centered approach in their digital implementations. I think a way to describe this actually comes from a paper on the Lego Group on how they transform themselves for the digital economy. But I really like the way that one of their enterprise architects talked about this new approach. But before, the traditional strategy or traditional digital strategy is thinking of digital as a push to end users, whereas in the innovative strategy thinks about the strategy as a pull from the end users. And the implication is that end user needs are actually changing all the time because, again, we exist in this ecological framework where we're influenced by the systems in which we exist in. And the real implication here is that there's really no such thing as a static strategy anymore. The strategy will change as our end user needs change. And I think this was something that we learned because when we first started the Wellbeing for LA Learning Center, we actually started in 2019. So it was right before COVID had started. And of course, COVID hit and we had to pivot, but we're really thankful that we were in a position to pivot in response to these new and emerging needs. And with that, I will hand it over to Lauren to help describe the Learning Center, but also speak to some of these habits and also pivoting during the COVID era. So I'll hand it over to Lauren to continue the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And hi, everybody. I'm glad you could join us today. I'm Lauren Marlott. I'm a clinical and community psychologist. So not surprisingly, I am going to be talking about our Wellbeing for LA content rather than the technical side of things. So our division at UCLA, as Rachel has said, is the Division of Population Behavioral Health. And we developed this learning management system in a public-public partnership with LA County's Department of Mental Health. It's a next generation learning management system that provides interactive and empirically supported content to advance professional development and well-being across the LA County workforce. And this content is meant for everybody in the workforce. So clinicians, educators, folks that work at the library, folks that work in our park systems, bus drivers. It's really meant for absolutely everybody who works in the county. And you all are welcome to sign up for a free account at learn.wellbeingforla.org if you want to take it for a spin and see what our content is like. We've developed thousands now of assets of curated digital content, and we emphasize resilience and workforce well-being. Back in or before 2019, when we launched the LMS, my co-presenters here did a needs assessment and talked to folks working in LA County about what they needed in this kind of large-scale online learning management system. And then they took that information and compared it to what out-of-the-box systems you all might be utilizing, maybe in your classrooms or in other circumstances. And we really found that these out-of-the-box LMSs weren't going to work for what the LA County workforce was asking for. There were limitations, like there weren't virtual training pieces. The learning communities didn't operate in the way that we want them to. So we decided to partner with Alliance Logic and built a custom-built LMS. So our emphasis is on trauma and resilience-informed practices. You may or may not have heard of this term before, but I really appreciate this arrow diagram to explain at a simplified but also very nuanced level that trauma-informed and resilience-informed trainings really means going from thinking about what's wrong with a person or a system to what could this person or the system possibly be going through. And then also identifying and harnessing the strengths that the person or the system has and building upon those in the work that we're doing. So I want to go over some of the digital content offerings that we have. We emphasize the need for human-centered design and cultural humility, and we utilize multimodal materials that hopefully will increase engagement, interest, and access. I'll go through these relatively quickly. This is what a training page looks like. Our learners can register for live virtual trainings and soon in-person trainings through our Wellbeing for LA Learning Center. We also have asynchronous content. Courses are some of our big content that we have. Using Articulate Rise and Articulate Storyline, we're able to offer courses that are less than an hour all the way through several hours long. We have printable tools, so usually 1 to 2 pages of a PDF that explains some concept in a relatively bite-sized piece. And even more bite-sized than our printable tools, we developed something called articles. Originally, we thought that people might be needing something while they're waiting for the bus to come or waiting in line at the grocery store. And these are bite-sized, really digestible pieces of practical information. We had a group that was really interested in making these articles even more interactive and engaging. So we have the capability to add videos and graphics into our articles. We have videos that range from a couple of minutes long to over an hour long video. We have learning pathways, which is one way to guide learners from content from A to B to C. And the content all falls under a category and then may result in some sort of certificate of completion or certification once they're done, or it's just a way to guide learners with our thousands of assets of, oh, if you wanted to watch a course on this topic, these other things all hang together. And we think it makes sense if you watch them in this specific order. We also have resource collections, which is a way to put multiple types of content together. These can be pretty small, all the way up to, several dozen materials. And then finally, we have, if I can get my mouse to work, our learning communities, which is like a closed Facebook group. So it's all around one topic. And we have invited people, for the most part, into the learning communities to have discussions and share resources. We've recently discovered some more open ways of developing those learning communities as well. So here we have the ways that we have created our content is keeping our community partners in mind. And actually, in many ways, we have co-developed materials with our community partners. We undergo needs assessments. We listen to our communities for what they're needing to make this relevant information. We also want to make even our asynchronous content very interactive so that it's engaging and we're listening, active listening where possible. For folks that need continuing education credits for their profession, we're able to offer some of those for some of our materials. And then finally, our last way that we've engaged learners is some of our content has been utilized in pilot samples that are actually required trainings and courses. And then other folks have independently taken some of the content that we have, assigned it to their team members, and then discussed that content in their staff meetings. So I'm going to take a little bit more close look at one piece of content to give you a close-up view of what this might look like. So we have a topic called Enhancing Family Engagement Through Adaptive Practices. This actually started out as a request from the Department of Mental Health in early 2020 to increase family engagement amongst educators. Then the pandemic happened and everybody's lives were turned upside down. And we actually ended up pivoting that content into an interview series and keeping the engaging families content, but now with an emphasis on system-involved youth. And we decided to create a course and had various pieces that went into that course building. We were able to have the luxury of having an extensive needs assessment where we could talk with folks with lived experience. We could talk to providers. We could talk to various subject matter experts working with and actually being a youth involved in systems. And what I mean by systems are foster care system, juvenile justice system, those kinds of systems. Then we worked with subject matter experts, curriculum developers. Being in Los Angeles, we had the luxury of working with a film team, and we had administrative support to actually develop the course. After the course was developed and put into our course wrapper, we had several independent reviewers to review our content, make sure that it made sense, make sure that we are checking our biases, did that kind of review. We then released the course. After a while, we take a look at some of our evaluation data and use that evaluation data as a part of our continuous quality improvement process. So this is what a course page looks like. You'll see it's got a thumbnail, it's got a title, it's got some metadata that tells you how long it is and if there's a CE and who's in this course. Then you also have this course overview. This is not meant to tell you everything that's in this course, but it's meant to tell you enough to get you interested in the course and to let you know what you can expect out of that course. Then for this particular course, we utilized some interesting graphics. We wanted folks to feel as though they were opening up a file folder, and the vocabulary word of the day is a skeuomorph. This is an ornamental version of something that was in an earlier product, a functional necessity. I'm not sure how many people still utilize file folders, but kind of got that reaction of thinking about, here's our file folder on this family and this family. Our content has these videos. Like I said, we were able to use a professional quality film team along with actors, and this was a semi-scripted course. Then we have some written content here. This helps summarize what was reviewed in the videos itself. And then it also helps apply this beyond what is seen in the video. So here we have a session with a family in person. This tab lets you know how you can do it virtually and some creative ways of implementing these skills. We also provide resources so that not only are you watching this engagement skill or technique with the family, but you can actually utilize it after you're done taking this course. We have an evaluation measure that we use on all of our courses and actually all of our trainings as well. We call them the common metrics because it is across various types of assets. You'll see that there's 2 lines here. We asked folks after they complete the course to rate themselves how they felt before they took the course. So retrospectively, and then to say now. The first question is, I have the skills and knowledge necessary to help the people I serve. Right, on a scale of 1 to 5, how strongly do I disagree or strongly do I agree with that? I'm confident in my capacity to help the people I serve. And the training provided me with effective solutions for the people that I serve. Those are some samples of our questions. And here you can see we had almost 300 people complete and evaluate the course. We have 2 final questions at the end that give some 2 final quantitative questions at the end that give us some information just generally. Do they think that other staff should get this training? And overall, how well do you rate this training? I'd say not surprisingly, because there's so much effort and expertise and firsthand knowledge that many of our courses tend to get these 4 and 5 type ratings. We also collect a little bit of qualitative information. I'll just share some of these quotes with you. Great modeling and examples. I thoroughly enjoyed the training and will put it into practice. The thing I liked best about the training was having videos showing how to implement the skills. So they like that demonstration piece. The best part was empowering youth and family. The training was excellent. The information was not too long, and I really appreciate watching the videos showing how the interventions can be used. I really appreciate the worksheets and forms you provided so that you can utilize the interventions too. The facilitator had both the families engage with each other and understand each other's feelings without getting upset. And then we also get some more critical feedback. I'd like to see how to work with more challenging clients like the ones in the video is what the assumption is. Some clients that are more resistant to participating in sessions. And of course, we take that into account as we're creating new content and then also revising our content as well. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague to talk about some of our more capabilities.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Rachel. And thanks all for attending. Again, my name is Greg Barish. I'm a computer scientist and I'm a co-founder and CEO of Alliance Logic. I'll be talking about the next generation learning center capabilities and focusing on the tech side of things. You've already heard a bunch of stuff from Lauren and Rachel about the breadth of the LMS, and now I'm going to be sort of talking about some of the technical details that I think you might be interested in. And for this, the themes are going to be around the learner and the team. How does technology help the learner? How does it help the team? And with each, we're going to focus on something we're doing right now and something that we're about to do, or we're debating how to do it. Just to give you a sense of of how this process works. But most importantly, I think going back to Rachel's earlier point about experimentation, we really love doing this stuff because it allows us, we've had several occurrences where we can sort of experiment with things as we've rolled this out. As Lauren said, and Rachel said, when COVID hit, we really had to put a lot of things into motion that were not necessarily on the board because people were all remote. And so we were able and had to experiment with certain things as we started. So let me lead you through these things. So for the learner, one of the most important things we do is personalization, and we use AI techniques to do that. So when we talk about personalization, it's all about the user who's on the right side here. And what do we do to personalize for the user? Well, we know when they onboard what their interests are. We ask them, we say, what are you interested in? And they say, oh, early education, child anxiety. That's what they say. And then there's what they do. What do they actually click on when they're on the system? So we get both what I'd say explicit preferences and implicit preferences, one that is more declarative and one that's more behavior-based. We take both of those things into a process that's called collaborative filtering, which I'll talk about in a moment. Some of you may know what that is. And then that is, eventually en route to the user. But in addition to collaborative filtering, we have other signals that we want to sort of use. And by the way, collaborative filtering in summary is really something to the extent of, what content have I not clicked on that is similar to other content that I have viewed and is of interest to people like me? So that's basically what that question is answering for us. But there's other signals that we use. What is popular? Maybe we want to get the user out of their echo chamber. We want to sort of prompt them with something that everybody else thinks is really popular. What's trending? What's most recently popular, as another way of saying that. Or maybe the user just tends to like trainings versus courses. Maybe we should use that as a signal. And that's really the research problem that's here, is how do we use this ensemble of techniques to detect what the user might be interested in and put it all together to know how do we recommend something to a user. So personalization, recommendations, that's what this is all about. Just to talk about collaborative filtering for a moment, for those who aren't familiar, I'm going to talk about two big parts of it. One is the user-to-user end, and one is the item-to-item end. I'm calling them peer-based similarity and the other item-based similarity. So the way to understand how we use collaborative filtering with peer-based similarity is consider the user at the top who likes these dessert items are synonyms for learning assets, right? So this user at the top likes the first dessert. Meanwhile, the second user likes all the desserts, and the weight of the arrow indicates a greater preference toward the last two items. Meanwhile, what do we recommend to this third user? Well, this third user has only clicked on the blueberries and the cupcake. They are most similar to the middle user, and the middle user has demonstrated interest in the last item, and so that's what we recommend to the user at the bottom. And that's sort of our peer-based way. We decide to cluster folks based on their shared interests as what they demonstrate by their behavior. We could also do the same thing based on their stated interests as well, but we have focused mostly on the behavior of late. In terms of the item-based similarity, this is the idea that if we could actually come up with a signature for content and give it a color, let's say, then if we knew that the user was interested in this blue and this gray thing, that this light blue, sky blue kind of thing, or turquoise is likely of more interest than the red thing to the user. So those are the two types of sort of factors for collaborative filtering that we use. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go through this quickly. It's what happens when you go back on a slide that's animated. All right, so in terms of that blue thing where we're talking about content-based similarity, how exactly does that work? What we're going to do here is show you that first of all, we look at these resources as document vectors. And so each of these things has a set of content, including a description like what you see below. Here's another resource with a different description, and yet another resource with yet another description. What we can do is we can use terms like stemming or techniques like stemming to know that the word experience and depression are variances here, but they're kind of related because they're basically the same root word. We can use synonyms, right? Pandemic and COVID-19 are synonymous with each other. And then we can also look at frequency, meaning a word like and shouldn't count as much as a word like depressed. So we can use these language signals to know how to cluster the information. And it should be pretty clear from this example that the first two items are much more similar than the third item is to either of them, because the first two items share more in common. Soon, we're interested in the idea of piloting gamification, which means as many of you are familiar with it, and it's been around. But of course, this is a behavioral health, mental health training center for clinicians and workforce. We're not sure it's appropriate. And so even though we might have capabilities like leaderboard ladders and so forth, we really want to sort of say, do we want to put out something where people can get points and badges in a system like this? If people are learning about grave disability or people experiencing homelessness, is it appropriate to do that? We still think it is because we think people are interested in learning, but we have to be careful with how we roll that sort of technology out. And that's really the message to take home here. In terms of technologies for the team, I'm sure you may have been in one or more talks today that talked about this guy, and we all know who he is. And of course, that stands for bidirectional encoder representations for transformers, or BERT, which is a very common and widely used, very successful NLP technique, very commonly associated with large language models as well these days, but a neural network-based technique for learning language. And what we do is we can take some pre-trained models, if we go back to what Lauren was doing, where she was picking out quotes of responses from trainings, we wondered, could we actually detect sentiment in those automatically to save her and her team the time of going through thousands, almost tens of thousands of that kind of feedback. So we pulled down some pre-training models from places like Hugging Face and other places, and we can use an ensemble approach again, basically an average or a voting model. There's other models out there that you could use, XGBoost and so forth. And then we can automatically decide, based on sort of this joint inference problem of multiple experts, is the sentiment good or bad? And we're not just listening to one model, we're listening to multiple. So we can sort of tune it to be more conservative or more liberal in terms of its judgment there. And that's the kind of way that we use NLP in terms of sentiment analysis. Here's some real examples of data we get back. I mean, these are actual feedback from some of our trainings on a related site. And you can see that these are some positive examples. The system, if you see the feedback in the text area, like this was a great training, I appreciate this. If you look over to the far right, you'll see that it has a very high positive score and a very low negative score. That was all done automatically. And it's interesting, all these are obviously positive. Of course, the real researchers out there will say, well, I wonder why the first one, which says this was a great training, I appreciate this, is ranked higher than the last one, which says this was a fantastic training, especially for someone who just starting out. And even the way I read that, you can kind of tell, I kind of think the last one is maybe more positive than the first one. But it's hard to know. And even for humans, it's hard to agree on this stuff. So we're trying to look at sort of challenges like this. How good can our ranking be automatically? Sentiment analysis is a notably hard problem. And so we're not the first to try this. But what's interesting about our approach here is that we're looking at it in the context of online training and feedback. So all of this is to be used toward what's called automated content quality assurance, continual quality introspection. I forget the I.
Improvement.
Thank you, Rachel. You can see here we have some negative examples, but some of these say none or no. And the question is, are these really negative? And it turns out they're not, because people were simply answering the question, what else could be improved about this training? And they said none. So even though it sounds like a negative word, it's not. They're really saying there was nothing else to improve. And so it's learning to deal with that kind of feedback as far as the technology goes. A couple of other things we do to help us scale technology for the team is trying to generate all these thumbnails that we have on the site with thousands of assets, as Lauren mentioned, is challenging. Sometimes we wonder, do we have duplicates? And so what we've actually done is to start looking at using computer vision and also other AI techniques using technologies like AWS recognition or Caffe, deep neural network models in order to look at whether these two images are similar. And this is we actually did this study on another project we were funded by outside of learning. And we were trying to figure out if a GitHub user was similar to a Stack Overflow user, for those of you familiar with those sites. This is actually the same user, they just used a very similar image. So in that particular example, we used a histogram correlation technique in order to figure out that these two images were very similar. So we're using techniques like this, histogram comparison, AWS recognition, SIFT key points to sort of come up with what's called a similarity score, so that we can inform our curators, our editors, what is similar, what's not. We don't want to make the decision for them, as we don't want AI to do, based on my experience. We want to use it for decision support. So we want to be very careful about having the AI actually make any real decisions there. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is sort of writing thousands of overviews. There's another thing to scale up on. All those overviews that Lauren showed you earlier, there's a question on how we actually write them. And it takes about 30 minutes basically for a typical human to write an overview like this. And we wondered, could we actually generate it automatically? This is what these overviews look like. You can see it in a little more detail here. Talks about the presenter, talks about the topic and its relevance, and what's going to be covered in the training. So we, of course, used a large language model, ChatGPT in this case, and we focused on how we could prompt ChatGPT in order to generate a better overview, or maybe just at least a good enough overview. Thank you. So we had these sort of prompts that we engineered. And as a result, we were able to generate overviews like this. This is done completely automatically. And it's actually more verbose. And I don't know, maybe it's more attractive than the human generated one. It's a little hard to tell the difference. And we actually measured how much time it took for our curators to write versus review something that ChatGPT generated. So once again, the focus is not on having something like ChatGPT put out there to users without curation. We actually want to see, could we actually scale up curation and content management? The last thing I'll mention really is the stats on the portal. We've done a lot as far as instrumenting things. So we're able to tell at a number of levels, what has been created, accounts created, courses enrolled, training registrations over various time quanta. And you can sort of see we're trying to engineer this towards are things ramping up? Are they ramping down? Are we in a busy period? Are we not? And so forth. And we've done this even over specific assets, such as this one called Enhancing Professional Wellbeing. You can see that during the beginning of COVID, it was very popular because everybody was at home. And we also had a large agency that we were training and so forth. So we've also, I think the last thing to sort of mention is that our stats start to get into the more exploratory, where we look at what's called learning community engagement. And even though we can measure post replies, number of members in a community, we have some more experimental calculations in here, such as what is the average number of replies per poster and so forth? What are the contributions per member and so forth? So with that, let me wrap up and sort of turn it back over to Rachel to wrap it up.
Sure. So as a summary, you learned a lot today about the Wellbeing for LA Learning Center and hopefully about our division and public health and behavioral health in general and how digital can support all of these efforts. And I think we're at time, but in general, our team achieved a lot of the success by experimenting, forming cross-functional teams and interdisciplinary teams and co-designing with end users. And so with that, I think we have slides here for if you wanted to visit our website or join our Wellbeing for LA Learning Center, feel free to contact us. And I'm not sure if these slides are being distributed, but we've also included a link of references if you want to do further reading into any of this. So thank you all for having us. And I think it's time for question and answer. So I'll stop talking now.
So Rachel, we do have a question that came in, and I'll go ahead and ask it. And it is from Jessica Mentasoglu. Thank you for your presentation, she writes. And looking at the format, I was thinking of UCLA and the UC's LMS and delivery of mandatory staff trainings. As for cybersecurity and other similar staff engagements, could this format be applied, repurposed for staff HR? And how does this differ from other LMS products? Collaborative filtering could also be used for career coaching. Would your current applications be used in student affairs? So the first question was, could this format be applied and repurposed for staff HR?
I definitely think so. We alluded to this more at the beginning, but when we first started exploring learning management systems, we originally were thinking of using an out-of-the-box solution. But then in talking with Lauren and Greg, we realized there was no such out-of-the-box solution. So the tool that you see is actually, and Greg can speak more to this, but it's actually a lot of different tools going on behind the scenes. So I definitely think that there's a way to apply these principles to any learning management system. But in terms of the specific technology, I can let Greg speak to that. But yeah, I think in general, the principles will still work.
I think in terms of the technology, as you may know, many of these technologies are out there. The hard part was getting them all in one place and getting them configurable the way a very large team wanted them configurable. We looked at top of the line LMSs at the time. We looked at up and coming LMSs. And honestly, they had strengths in certain areas, but you couldn't do the wide variety of modalities only half of the modalities that Lauren showed, we found on the average LMS. Really no support for live trainings. If you were doing live trainings, you were on Eventbrite, most likely. That's what we saw. Most of it was geared toward asynchronous, but when COVID started, synchronous live online Zoom-based trainings became really popular. So that was one thing. The learning communities, as Lauren mentioned, really couldn't find something that had a community. We saw forums, but not communities. And so that combined with the flexibility of launching a variety of pathways. We didn't even see pathways. We saw curricula, but it was really hard to sort of see everything that we wanted in one place.
We've also been able to be very responsive to learners. So if we have a partner or a learner making a request that comes through kind of in a pattern, we can say, well, maybe we should think about this in a different way and decide that instead of just having virtual trainings courses, we add this thing called a learning experience where it's kind of like a course, but it's not exactly a course. And we wouldn't be able to do that if we use an out-of-the-box tool. Now, I will state maybe the obvious, but the biggest con is that this is much more resource intensive. So, we need a whole team to help us build this LMS. And with the quality of our materials, they're very, very resource intensive. So I think that, yes, our mandatory trainings could be improved, but there needs to be a lot of resources put into that.
And then Jessica also writes, yes, they claim learning analytics and personalization, but in reality, it is hard to implement.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, in fact, we looked at just if she's talking about automatic personalization, we looked at the top of the line LMS at the time that did this sort of thing, and it was very opaque how it worked. So we have a lot more flexibility as far as personalization with what we've done, I think.
Okay, great. And I think the last part of the question was collaborative filtering could also be used for career coaching. Would your current application be used in student affairs? May have answered that a little bit.
I think if we're asked, I don't know if we've ever been asked. Yeah, I think most of our scope right now is just with the Wellbeing or the LA County. So we sort of exist there, but we're happy to collaborate and share ideas with others. I think a lot of this technology I think could, as long as you have the right data and the learners and there's ways to put all this together, I think, with any technology.
And the learning platform is generic. We just happen to deploy it on behavioral health. And so it could be applied to anything, but we'll definitely be able to use lessons learned from the behavioral health deployment of it. So we've deployed it for other domains, in fact, and happy to chat about that if you're interested.
And actually, Greg, to that point, one thing I think we've learned with this is that because of the topics, we've learned how to be very culturally sensitive and responsive to end user needs. So I think that it was an exercise in learning about that. So I think all those principles can be applied to many different areas. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, I was just agreeing. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and Jessica also wrote, that is great. I am with the UCLA library, and see here, and some of your current trainings could be used with our student staff. Lauren also writes, wonderful. Please feel free to create a free account and explore, get in touch. So thank you, Lauren. I'm not making sure everybody reads your message. Create a free account and explore, and get in touch if you have further questions or want to discuss more. And you got a thank you all from Jessica. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for the presentation. It was wonderful, and for everybody for attending.
And if anybody in the live stream has questions, feel free to get in touch with us.
And just making sure, yeah.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye. Thank
Take
you
care.
all.
Thank you for presenting. Bye-bye.
Bye.